The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the David Brent Dowlen story. In this episode, Brent takes us through his remarkable journey. He starts as the son of a domestic missionary. He talks about becoming a sociopath where he can completely divide his emotions from the scenario he's in, how he can live two separate lives, how he grows up moving and experiencing different things, but there's really a dichotomy in his being. Then he talks about going into the military, his journey there of alcoholism, drug abuse, suicidal tendencies, and then how he gets out and not only talks about how he was running from God, how he hit rock bottom, but how he found his way out, and we can too. So all this and more in this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the David Brent Dowlen story. So grab your pen and paper, unless you're driving, take notes, and then most important, don't forget to apply them to life. So at this time, let's meet our guest, friend, and remarkable hero, David Brent Dowlen. Hey, Brent, how are you today?
David, it's good to see you again, man. It's been too long.
Way too long. I love talking to you in our last conversation, and our listeners, I just kind of prep them about who you are and what you're doing. So they're super excited to hear your story. So at this time, my friend, let's just jump in. We're going to go through the past, the present, and then we'll transition into the future. So where were you born? What was your upbringing like? Then bring us through any highs, lows, or in-betweens of your life that you feel led to share. And then if you can, we're also going to break it down to the practical steps. So not only is this what Brent achieved or what he overcame and learned, but this is the practical steps of how you did it so we can too. Sound good?
Fair enough. We can do this.
Awesome, man. So where are you from? Let's start with that. Where were you born and raised?
I laugh about that because I was born in Ada, Oklahoma, but I only lived there, I think, maybe the first 9 months of my life, and it was kind of an accident that I was born there. My parents were getting ready to transition back to Texas because my whole family's native Texan, and they just didn't get the transition done as fast from where they were at the time as they had planned on. And so I'm like the one-off in the family. I'm an Okie, but my brother tells me it's okay because that's just North Texas. Mine's out of a Texan, right? So yeah, I was born in Oklahoma, but I don't actually say I'm from anywhere because my father was a domestic missionary minister, and he worked predominantly with small churches. So I have actually, between that and my later years of my life, I've literally lived from coast to coast. We were talking about it when you and I talked before. I mean, I've lived down in Florida by where you're at. I've lived in Virginia. I currently reside in Washington and have been back and forth here several times. I went to high school in Wyoming. I graduated from somewhere I've never been in Mississippi. So where I'm from is kind of, my kids like to tease me actually, because it's left me with this weird trait of I don't have an accent, but I pick up every accent I'm around. So last night I was watching Fighting with My Family with my kids, and I started sounding very British throughout the rest of the night because the longer I'm exposed to an accent, the more I pick it up. So I don't actually have my own accent because of it.
Yeah, you learn to adapt and overcome to your surroundings, whether it's conscious or not.
Right. And I don't have any control over it. I don't try and do it. I actually get a little self-conscious. People are like, what's with the accent? What accent? You've got this accent. Oh, yeah, I was just watching this, right? So because my dad was a domestic missionary, we moved around a lot. And I'm actually grateful for it. When I was younger, I was very upset about it because we had to move, and I left a lot of friends behind over and over again, had to start over and over again. But it gave me a lot of exposure that I've learned as an adult a lot of people don't get. We have a lot of very fine cultures inside the United States. People think of it as one place, but really there is just a ton of different cultures domestically inside the United States, and people don't even realize that they are as different as going to a different country sometimes. So
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think there's at least 6, maybe more major regions of the US, and everywhere you go has its own mindset and culture.
Oh yeah, I am down to the way they talk, the foods they eat, the way they live their day-to-day life. So it's actually very, in hindsight, it was a good upbringing because it gave me a lot of exposure and made me very capable of adapting to where I am. But we went to high school, or went to all over the place. Like I said, Missouri, Wyoming. I loved Wyoming. It was during very formative years of my life. I have a lot of fond memories of Wyoming. Definitely was cowboy culture. I actually worked on a ranch when I was in high school. Legit, like, worked on a ranch, pushing cattle on horseback, gun, lasso, the whole 9 yards. And so I've had all these adventures moving around that have really shaped me. But I was also a really klutzy kid. Like I have really bad sinuses. And so I've racked up more than my fair share of injuries over the years. My head is quite lovely. I've got some close-ups on my website. It's very topographical. It looks like a topographical map in places. So
Nice.
I've racked up easily over a dozen concussions over the years, probably way more than that. Those are just diagnosed. But, moving around gave me this whole different perspective on life. I don't know how detailed you want me to get in some of this.
No. I mean, there's people from over 90 countries listening to this. Some get it. Some have been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Some have only lived in one spot their entire life. So let's just break this section of your story down quickly and make it easy. You've said some of the benefits of moving a lot and relocating is, you made friends, you learned how to make friends quickly and easily, adapt to the environment. You talked about how it accelerated your maturity and your growth. Use different words, but that's, I believe, what you were expressing.
Right.
What were some of the things that were hard, but that you learned to overcome?
Really, it was very difficult to. One of the benefits is I'm very tight with my family, and that's because that was the constant in my life. So we have a very close-knit family, and I picked up an adopted brother along the trip. But one of the drawbacks was I tend to keep people at an arm's length. I have to now work to let people into my inner circle, because as a kid, it's really hard to process having to say goodbye over and over again and making those friends. And then the reality is, when you move around a lot, I've heard it said, if you can count your close friends on one hand at the end of your lifetime, you're blessed. You have a really rich life to be able to number, 5 super close friends. But as a kid, you don't quite understand that, right? So leaving and starting over and over again has its traumatic downside. I started having really hard issues connecting with people sometimes, because I knew I was going to turn around and say goodbye in 2 or 3 years. And I also knew that no matter what they said, the majority of those people I would never speak to again. I had so many friends over the years that said, hey, we'll write you, we'll call you, this won't come between us. And I never talked to him or saw from him again. I might talk to him once, twice, but the truth is, you go your separate ways, right? Life keeps moving forward. And so it got to where it was very difficult to let people close. I tended to put up a facade and keep people at a safe distance, because I knew I was leaving again. It was just the way life was.
Yeah, and
And
this
so,
was before cell phones and internet. When you and I grew up, that didn't exist. I mean, we
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
had phone calls and we still had long distance charges. So it wasn't as convenient to keep a relationship going long distance.
I paid a lot of long distance bills over the years, which is a funny concept in the modern age.
Yeah,
But
people are like, what? Like some
that,
people are
that made
listening have no idea what we're talking about. Long distance was we used to have phones on the wall. And
Mhm,
sometimes we actually call an operator or 411 to get someone's phone number in our town or in
yep.
another town, and then they'd connect us. And if it was outside of a little geographic region near where we lived, they charge us per minute a very expensive rate, like $1.
Oh
And a
yeah.
dollar back then was a lot more than now. So, I mean, I guess equivalency when we were kids to now is at least $5 a minute, maybe as high as 10.
It's very
So it's pretty pricey.
yeah, I racked up my wife and I racked up a lot of phone bills before we got married. But that's farther along in the story. So yeah, there are those definitely those drawbacks. You learn to be very superficial to protect yourself, which has taken a lot of years for me to get past, to be honest. I mean, I'm 42 now. It's taken a lot of years for me to get past that, where I just kept people out here. And I'm still very slow to let people into my inner circle. So that was a drawback for sure.
So is that something you want to discuss now, how you overcame that? Because it's natural. Like you said, it's not even conscious as a child to
Mhm.
keep people on the outside because you don't want to let them in and be hurt. You don't, you know, you're leaving. So when you leave, it hurts more if you care about them. So you keep them out. So do you want to discuss now tips and tricks and tools, how you overcame that? Or do you want to wait to further in your story?
Well, I'll say it's still a process, so it's up to you. I'm still really in process on that. That's one of the last guards I'm really trying to let down in my life is letting people in, and I made progress on it. And so we can definitely look at that insight. We can do that now or later in the podcast, whatever you want to do, man.
Yeah, let's do it later in the podcast. People are sticking around. We got a lot of listeners that go right through the end. So if you have walls in your life, stick around and Brent's going to teach you how to help bring them down. And he's learning too. So maybe you can write him and help him. So we help each other, right? So,
Right?
okay, so pick up. So you're moving around a lot. Your father's a domestic missionary. What else was it like growing up? Like, what were there any lessons learned that you were really like, you know, this was tough, or I really learned a lot that I'm using today in life?
I learned to communicate with people really effectively along the way because there was so much change and so much transition. I had to get really good at learning to communicate with people from the get-go, getting people to give you that chance, right? When you're new, when you're different, when you're coming from outside their world, takes some very forward motion on your part. And so it really made me increase my communication skills early on and my interpersonal communication. I also got really good at just adapting my perspective along the way because of all those transitions. And a lot of that because I was very blessed to have a really amazing family. We're all very tight still. I have 3 siblings and they are still some of the closest people in the world to me. My mom actually lives with my wife and I and our kids since my dad passed on. So there's a lot of pickups, but there were a lot of physicalities to overcome. I damaged my knee when I was still in, I think 12. I started wrestling in junior high and had a bad wrestling partner and really tore up my knee. So at 12 years old, I started developing severe knee pain. My dad would actually have to pick me up and carry me into the house after wrestling practice. I'd tough it out walking to the car in front of the guys, but my dad would actually have to pick me up and carry me into the house. And I'd spend the rest of the night with just my knee iced and stuff like that.
That's funny you say that because, like in anything, jujitsu, any kind of martial arts, wrestling, you don't get hurt when you're competing with high quality individuals. It's the people who don't know what they're doing that injure you. And I had the same thing happen in high school. To my knowledge, to date, I had 0 knee problems. And this kid karate chopped the side of my leg when he shot in. I sprawled out,
Mhm.
blew my knee out. And then after that, I had both knees go out like over 10 times total. So it's crazy how one injury can set you in a path. And you were 12 when that started?
Yeah, I had a partner, the only guy who wrestled in my weight class on my team. He his single leg takedowns were bad, and he would just jam his shoulder into the side of my knee as hard as possible every time. And in wrestling practice, right, it's repetitive. You keep doing it over and over again. You keep drilling that same move. And so you might switch left knee or right knee, but you keep hitting that same takedown over and over and over. And he would just jam his shoulder into the inside of my knee every time. And it added up for sure. I wrestled in 6th grade, and I actually had to quit the team in 7th grade because my knee had gotten so bad I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's crazy. And he wasn't doing it on purpose. He just didn't have talent. Is that what you're saying? It wasn't conscious. He was trying to hurt you, right?
That would be my opinion. We got along outside of there, so that would be my opinion. It's his understanding of how it was supposed to go was that's what you did.
And I'm sorry. So you're in school, you're wrestling, you're 12 years old, you're moving around a lot, and you already have this part of your life kind of like, I can't do this anymore. So taken away almost as a kid, you look at it. Where do you go from there, Brent?
That one, that was not my big problem there. I was the fat kid. I grew a foot between my 6th and 7th grade year. Like, it was an incredibly horrendously painful summer because I grew a foot in 3 months.
Yes, muscle cramps, spasms, all that, right?
And with my knees already achy, but I did the butterball thing. Like, I was the chubby kid who was pretty hefty, and then I shot up a foot, but I was still pretty heavy. I mean, at 6th grade, I was wrestling at like 175. I didn't look super fat, but I was a heavy kid. So I was already picked on a lot. I was accepted on the field because I could perform. Like, I was a starter in all of our sports. And so that got me some acceptance, but I also got a lot of ridicule, right? They call me Big D. It wasn't just because I was bigger than they were. It was because I was bigger than they were, right? And that actually started building to a lot of anger because I felt like I just couldn't get away. Even as I leaned out a little bit and got more athletic in junior high, 7th and 8th grade, I started getting just really angry because I felt like I couldn't ever get out of that fat kid status. And that's just who I was. It actually had a big role to do with us moving at the end of my 8th grade year. Is my parents knew I needed a new start. I could not get out of that there. And I was coming home every day and like chopping wood, and I had pallets strung up on the side of the house and a big, like, heavy steel pipe. And I just sit there and shatter pallets. I'd string them up on strings and just sit there and break the wood over because I was so angry all the time. My dad was trying to keep me from taking it out on other people. And so, yeah, between my knees getting injured, so I had to drop off that sport, and trying to just outlive the fat kid status, junior high was a little rough. I made it, but
yeah. Now, did you learn in high school how to overcome this, or again, is that later in your story and we'll touch back on it?
the weight thing is something that I've always struggled with because I'm a bigger kid. I did learn to start paying more attention to what I was eating in high school. I also, part of it was just, I lost a lot of the extra chubbiness by 8th grade, but I couldn't get out of that shadow. Sometimes you have to have that change of place, right? Sometimes you can't start over where you are and get a clean slate. That's one of the things I really feel for some of these people who have not moved around, is they've never truly known what it was like to have a blank slate.
Yeah. And just to clarify for individuals who haven't had that opportunity, there is a difference. And Brent, I think you can expand on this or agree or disagree. Running from your problems never works. Your problems catch up to you and they're worse. But reconciling where you're at and getting a fresh start, that's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and a great solution many times. So is that what you're referring to? You had a fresh start, a blank slate, but you weren't running. You were just
Right. No,
understanding, growing, learning, and then saying, okay, this is how it is, but now I'm going to restart here with more confidence and not take so much crap.
absolutely. My parents kind of proactively helped me into that, right? They saw their son growing up. They saw me making different choices and acting different ways. They had seen the physical changes, but I couldn't stay with people who were boxing me into this idea, because no matter what changes I was making in my life, I was still this kid. It's like I joke about the fact that, my brother is 49. I'm 42. Yeah. My brother is 49. He's 7 years older than me. And when he looks at me, he tries to treat me with the respect of an adult. But my brother also sees the 11 and 12-year-old boy, and always will, because his life branched bigly, because in a large way, because of the age difference. About the time that I was going into 6th grade, my brother left for the Navy. And so his life with me at a full-time basis was over. And so I'm always kind of in that place with him. And my brother treats me really well. We get along great. I love my brother. He's one of my heroes. But he has to work sometimes because he still wants to see the little brother instead of the man sometimes, just because, he's always going to be my older brother, right? My mom's 70 years old. She stands to the middle of my chest. I'm always her baby, right? She respects me as the man I am, but I'm always her baby. It's just, but you don't get that with other people sometimes. Sometimes you kind of get pigeonholed into one idea. And so you can make your changes, but sometimes you just have to go somewhere else to get away from the people that are keeping you from being able to become who you want to be.
100%. I agree with you completely. And then do you find yourself also, to this day, I wouldn't say my self-perception is what other people see. So if I wrote down a description of who I am, I don't think it, like, now I'm learning that it doesn't accurately reflect who I am. And it's definitely not who other people see, because I had this childhood instances like you, and you get this negativity that Satan jams in your head and he wants you to believe the lie.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you start break? And even if we jump around the story a little bit, we'll go back to when you moved here and you're in high school. But to help our listeners who have this false image, could be false image of themselves as a whole, could be just a false physical image. I've known like people who are fit and they look at themselves in the mirror and they still see the fat kid.
Oh yeah.
So what did you do to work yourself to reprogram your brain? I know it's always a work in progress, but what are some of the steps you took that our listeners can too to get started healing?
I feel like I had an unfair advantage when it comes to this subject because of the familial support I had. And for me, I'll always go back to family, right? Family is such a huge thing for me. I have a very loving family. So my parents were very supportive. And so my parents always saw me in my best light, whether I saw myself that way or not. So, finding somebody in your life that sees the best version of you is something that everybody really needs in their life, right? You talk about those 4 or 5 people you absolutely need in your life. There are 4 or 5 critical people that you just absolutely need in your life. And one of them is that friend who sees the best version of you, period. I've had some friends, I even had a client. It's like, I wish I could help you see yourself through my eyes, because you're still stuck in the past on this, and I've seen the progress. I wish I could get you to see yourself through my eyes. And we all need that friend who sees the best, because having that support gives you a stable place to work from. Even when you don't believe in yourself, having somebody in your life who sees the best version of you, no matter how you're seeing yourself, is a huge benefit. But part of it is to start to get out of that, right? You have to decide that you have the power to write your story. If you want to get out of that negative perception of how you see yourself, you have to take ownership. First, you got to take ownership and decide, hey, I am in control. I am the final say in how this looks for my life. And once you start to take the ownership of your life, you can then go, this is how I want to see myself. This is what I want to be. And you can start mapping that out in your head or on paper if you need to, but you can start mapping out that image of this is what I want to see and start taking the steps to get there. Right. But you got to come from a place, I have ownership of it first. This is my life. This is my story. I'm the one who writes that. Good, bad, I'm the one who decides that. And then you can start to look at where you want to go and start making those steps and go, okay, well, this is how I was perceived or how I perceived myself. How do I change that? Do I need to learn how to change my relationship with food? Do I need to learn to change my relationship with exercise? Do I need to learn to look for a different kind of relationship in my life? Right? Do I need to find better friends who make me better instead of friends that drag me down? But it all starts with ownership and then deciding where you want to go. And from there, you can start to unbox yourself. And there's always going to be some things that you're going to have to learn to forgive yourself for and say, yes, I was this, right? I was that fat kid. I don't want to be that anymore, but I'm okay with that. That was a portion of my life, and I've got to move forward from that. That's not who I am. That doesn't define me. That's not the future of my story. That was a chapter. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. And again, we're looking just to get people, they see your results and you being transparent, you're still on the journey. So it's how did you get started? So hopefully they can too. And I believe everything you said is true. So for our listeners, they're going to see what connects with them and they're going to run with it. And like our slogan says, we don't want to just listen to your great content. We want to do it, repeat it each day so we can have a great life in this world and eternity to come. So working on that mental image every day, like if you like, if someone heard, you're a piece of crap, you loser, you fatso, all these things that you and I heard growing up, we could be in the best shape of everyone around us. And we still wake up in the morning and see a fat kid in the mirror. So the mental process, it's not overnight. Sometimes people have epiphanies and it's boom, like it does happen. I had an epiphany in my life. I was introverted till I was in my senior year, took a trip to California, saw the world was different than Milford, Massachusetts. And after that, I was like, I don't care what anybody thinks. I care about what God thinks and what I think. And the rest is gravy if it works out. And that changed my life. So there are epiphany moments, but typically it takes time. And with that deep pain, sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes years. So thank you for sharing your journey and how you recover and how you still are.
I think you hit on an important factor there, and I care what God thinks. And that was very foundational and has been very foundational in my life. I don't know how some people transpire through the difficulties in life without a faith or without that relationship with God. I can't imagine going through some of the things I've gone through in my life without having God in the base layer of everything. Right. I just can't imagine what my life, there are a few people who have imagined what my life would be like without that guidance. And that is just foundationally, I don't know, I could have gotten through some of the struggles because I've been in some dark places. And God has always been at the foundation of coming around on that.
So you're in high school, your parents see the pain you're in, your dad decides to wrap up the
That was
ministry.
junior high.
Say what? Junior high.
Junior
high. So he sees the pain you're in. And one thing you said that we didn't touch on, there's people who falsely believe that if you destruct things and if you box and hit a heavy bag, oh, that's so carnal and that's so bad. No way. If you take your aggression out on an inanimate object in the right context, that's the best thing I think you can do. You're focusing your energy, you're focusing your attention, you're venting. So then when you're done and exhausted, you left it all in the ring, or you left it all in the bag, or you left it all breaking those pallets, you're done. And you walk away with a burden off. Is that how you felt? Because that's how I feel. I'll wail on a bag to the point I've knocked it off the hinge a few times. But when I'm done, I'm like, okay, I'm done.
My dad actually introduced me to weightlifting during that time period as well, where I met a former Golden Gloves boxer who taught me how to hit a heavy bag the right way, because he saw me just over there wailing on the bag. He's like, son, you're gonna break yourself.
Break your wrist. Yeah, you can easily break a wrist for life.
And he asked my dad, because my dad was there with me, and got permission and put some gloves on me and actually taught me how to punch correctly. But I think it kept me out of between that and I went from breaking pallets to I started splitting wood, something a little more constructive than leaving shards of wood all over the lawn. But I think that's honestly what kept me out of more fights. I had a couple fights that fizzled out, junior high fights, right? Come on, man. Yeah. Everybody yelling at each other, big group of kids, fight, right? All that nonsense where, basically only one guy ends up taking a swing, maybe two blows are thrown. It's like, oh, that's a fight. But it kept me from taking it out on the kids who upset me. I've always been very aggressive. It's part of my nature, and it's something I had to learn. My dad taught me early on. It's like, you're going to have to learn to control this. You are going to be a big guy. You're going to physically intimidate people, and you're going to have to control that physicality that you're going to have. And so, he gave me outlets. He provided that outlet for me. He didn't like the whole shattering pallets, but until he found a better solution for me, he kept supplying me with pallets, right? And until he gave me other options to get around that. But it kept me focused on the fact that I was letting the aggression out, but I wasn't hurting anybody. And I think our movement towards, oh, that's not okay, actually has a lot to do with some of the problems we've seen in schools, right? We've seen school shootings. School shootings weren't a thing when I was in school. I went to high school in Wyoming. We had guns in our trucks out in the parking lot, and that was okay because we were all going to the ranch to work afterwards. It was just part of life. Guns were a tool, and no one was worried about someone coming in and shooting up the school. But we all had very physical habits and jobs, and in junior high, I wasn't going to go around and beat up everybody in the school or shoot somebody because I was getting that out. When I came to school, I didn't have that demon I was fighting at the time because I had worked that all out on the bag.
Yeah, 100%. The Bible says, be ye angry and sin not. When you're beating a bag, you're not sinning. You're emptying yourself. You're working through the therapy, physically, emotionally, spiritually. You're getting it out. So I'm a big, strong believer in hitting a heavy bag. Because if I'm hitting a heavy bag, I'm not hitting the guy who pissed me off, right? Being blunt.
So, weights are that therapy for me sometimes.
Yeah, and that's it. You can like underwater basket weaving. I really don't care what you like, but do something to get the aggression out in a healthy way. So that's awesome. So pick up in high school. You guys move. And so where do you move at that point to?
We moved to central Wyoming. I went to high school in Riverton, Wyoming, in Fremont County, which is larger than Rhode Island, with twice as many horses as people and 3 times as many antelope as horses. It's one of the only places I've ever lived where you can drive an hour and not see another soul. It is a cowboy town. It is natural gas and ranches. In fact, all the adults, that's why I said we all had guns in the trucks and stuff like that, because the kids are the ones who ran town during the day or during the afternoon stuff after school, because parents were out either on the ranch or in the natural gas fields or going farther south to like the uranium mines and stuff like that. And so like all the businesses in town were high schoolers as managers and stuff like that. everywhere I went, it was like, oh, hey, Cindy, hey, so-and-so, I knew everybody who worked everywhere because I went to school with all of them. And that was a very different, like, it freaked me out when we moved there. The day we rolled into town, my best friend, we're coming from northern Washington over on the coast. I was in Skagit Valley. It was farther north than Seattle, but I lived in that area before. But we were pulling into town and my best friend had driven down with us. And me and him are looking out the window and we're like, Dad, call the police. Because we saw this kid walking into a store with a gun, like big gun slung over his shoulder, right? We're like, Dad, call the cops. They're gonna roll somebody. And my dad just died laughing. He's like, no, son, he's probably just going to get his gun worked on. I was like, no, that's not what's gonna happen. Of course, thankfully I was wrong, but it was such a different culture shock from being out here on the West Coast. And, before I went to Skagit Valley, I lived in a town where, I mean, we had major gang leaders in our church. They brought their gangs to church with them. Like our church was a neutral zone in Tacoma. And so I grew up around gangbangers. I was used to gang violence, being around. Thankfully, I never spent a lot of time in it, but it was common. It was around. It was a culture I was very familiar with. And so, Wyoming was such a culture shock to go to this cow town that like was legitimately a cow town. There were guys driving around. They got trucks. They got dogs in the back of the truck. They got sidearms on their legs, like, gun holsters. I'd only ever seen like a movie. And so that was a huge culture shock, but a very cool place.
Yeah. So did that free you up to kind of see the world's different and I can be me? How did that affect you growing up?
It actually took a really weird turn for me because so I'm 42, as we talked about. The 90s was a very big part of my life, right? I grew up, I was listening to Nirvana when they were garage band, right? I was right in that very influenced area by the birth of grunge and the Seattle bands and stuff like that. And so when I went to Wyoming, I showed up for freshman orientation and I'm wearing like Levi's silver tab jeans that are sagging with combat boot style shoes. I've got flannel tied around my waist and a white t-shirt and my dad's old army jacket on and John Lennon sunglasses. And I walked in like 10 minutes late.
You're how big too at this point? Like 6, you're a big boy.
I'm 6 foot at this point. I'm 185 or so. And so I walk in 10 minutes late with the principal addressing the incoming freshman class, who I knew nobody with except for 1 or 2 kids from my church. And so I walked in, it was instantly a scene because I'm interrupting and I dress very different than everybody else around me. And so, not one to waste the attention or the scene, I strolled across the bleachers in front of everybody, interrupted the entire thing, walked to my own section of the bleachers, stomped halfway up and just flopped down. A girl from my church I started dating over the course of the summer, and like I got an earful from her because her best friend's little sister was in the freshman class and she heard all about the spectacle I caused. But from that day on, everybody caught that I moved from Washington. And, you've traveled enough, right? If you live in Florida, you must be from Orlando or Miami, right? Because that's all that's in Florida, right?
That's what people think. Yeah.
If you live in Washington, you're from Seattle. Doesn't matter where you live in Washington, you're from Seattle. Most people don't even realize there is a Northern California. It's incredible the mindset people have.
Yeah. And did you notice too, Olympia to Seattle, totally liberal for the most part. The rest of the state's completely conservative.
Yep. It's Olympia to Smoky Point at this point.
Yeah. I mean, there's been legislation put up that people want to separate Washington into 2 states so they can actually have a state that's functional and let the liberals die off because they're crazy nuts.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
when
I signed that legislation.
yeah,
All those gathering signatures. Yeah, I signed all those.
yeah, I remember I lived out there when Dino Rossi ran against Christine Gregoire, and she stole that election, had people recount 3 times the ballots. Every time she got more votes. And then he's like, okay, I want to recount. And she's like, oh, what is it, a mulligan? Like when I play golf with my husband? I mean, completely liberal, out of their mind mindset. And if I'm offending you, sorry, tough freaking luck.
I was
Because
here for that election, so no.
yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It was totally stolen. And listen, right's right, wrong's wrong. The best person should win. The best person should be in office. And that place, you have Olympia to Seattle, that's completely liberal. The rest of the state is sane and conservative. And just the shenanigans that happen are like what we're seeing today in America,
Yep.
completely out of people's mind. Stuff we wouldn't even imagine would happen 10 years ago. And now it's mainstream. So
Really.
if you haven't seen Seattle, don't judge the whole state of Washington based on that infrastructure.
Such a small
It's like,
part of the state.
yeah, it's like San Francisco and Pelosi, complete garbage, but the rest of California is gorgeous, right? I actually love San Francisco, but I'm just saying the politics is garbage.
Seattle
So,
would break your heart. What
huh?
they've done. Seattle would break your heart what they've done to it.
Oh, I moved in 2007 and it was still a gorgeous city. Is it, say again?
It's seriously not even safe to go downtown at this point.
Yeah, that's just insane.
Stores and famous stores that have been in downtown Seattle forever are closing their doors and leaving Seattle.
Is the fish market still open or is that closed? Pike's Market?
I don't know. I know it's still there. I don't know how well they're running because I just won't go over there at this point. But places that are historic, like downtown square, Red Square and stuff like that, there's homeless encampments everywhere. There are drug deals going down on the street. They're passing out needles. They're passing out needles to the druggies.
We'll go on the hang. I have another podcast, Hanging Out with David Pasqualone and Friends. We'll shelf this conversation. Me and you will have that show. But let's focus on your story because my blood pressure is going up and I have to take an extra blood pressure med here. But to wrap that up, listen, if you were supporting liberal politicians, liberal meaning they support everything basically against God and the Bible and sanity, I'm sorry, please open your eyes. It's like right now we're recording, it's like March 21st, 2022. I might be a day off, but fuel prices are out of control. The economy's out of control. The border's out of control. The ports are out of control. And the gas price has been going up steadily for an entire year, coincidentally, since this administration took office, right? And somebody said, oh, it's because of Russian conflict the other day. I'm like, do you watch TV? Do you ever think maybe to use this thing called a calendar? I'm like, gas price was going up way before the Russian conflict. Plus, the Russian-Ukraine conflict is complete crap. We can't believe anything we see on TV because Ukraine isn't a bunch of angels like they're making it out. Not that I advocate what's happening to their people. The Ukrainian people are good people. The Russian people are good people. American people are good people. But these scumbag elitists in office who care about no one but themselves are running us all in circles. It's like the war on COVID's a figure eight. We're never getting out of the war on COVID because it makes them too much money.
Yeah, we could go off along on your other podcast.
Yeah, let's go. So let's get back to Brent. So you move from Nirvana land to and Nirvana the band, not Nirvana like great. And you move into Wyoming, which is
Cowboy Central.
Beautiful, but Cowboy Central. So what's it like there?
Well, so I'm the new gangbanger in school by proxy because I moved from Washington. So everybody was immediately terrified of me. Like, and apparently people in Wyoming cannot whisper. Like, I went to go open my locker first, got my locker assignment right. And there's these 2 kids leaning around the locker bay and they're like, hey, see that guy over there? And they're talking to each other. Like, I can hear them. I'm like, that's the new gangbanger, dude. He's from Seattle. Like, I was trying not to die laughing. And so, just to add a little, punctuation to it, I slammed my locker real quick and turned on them and they go running down the hall. It was hilarious. I thought it was great fun, but it completely changed where I had come from. I went from being that chubby kid that couldn't outgrow it to all of a sudden I'm the new gangbanger, which just blew my mind. And so I started over and I started finding people who didn't fit like me. We ended up, by the time I left that high school, I had a group of about 20 friends, and we didn't belong to a specific clique. We belonged to each other. And everybody was very unique. About half of us had moved in from out of the area. One of my best friends was from Riverside, California. He did move from gangland. My adopted brother, the man who later became my adopted brother, literally had been in Cincinnati, Ohio. We had all transplanted. And so we made our own little group, and we picked up some other people along the way, but I'm actually friends with a lot of those people. They became my core, and we developed a really, like, my high school experience was amazing. I was very blessed to make some great friends who are still friends to this day and have kept up with me all over the years as I've moved all over the country. We all moved on with our own lives. And so my high school was an amazing turnaround for me. And I mean, there's always the meathead, boneheads, whatever you want to call them at some point, right? The guys who, because I'm bigger, wanted to start a fight with me, right? That would never go far. But I kind of collected all the people who didn't quite fit somewhere. And high school became an amazing experience for me. So it was such a change because I got to start over. Now, I got labeled, and eventually I managed to shake the whole, oh, he's a gangster thing, because that was just hilarious to me. It's like, no, really, no. But I grew a lot in high school as a person because I had a supportive group of friends.
That's awesome. What a change from the last location, right? So what about your spiritual walk at this point? You're from a family in the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Your father went from ministry to ministry, helping out. That's his calling.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you at? Because a lot of times, like, there was times in my life, I don't feel like I fit in with people who don't believe in God. And I don't feel like I fit in with the people who do supposedly believe in God. I felt like out of place. And that's what it sounds like. You got your core group of people who didn't fit, but yet you fit together. So where were you spiritually at this point in your life?
Spiritually was interesting. Because we had done so much moving, I was so good at putting on a facade that I actually kept my church life and my spiritual life 100% separate from the rest of my group, the rest of my life. Obviously around my house, my father was one of the most devout Christians I've ever known. Like, not like holier than thou devout, like humble, gracious, like what the Bible talks about. My father never met somebody he didn't care about and love. He cared for everybody he could. He always had time for everybody, and genuinely, like, I literally had seen the man weep over the idea of people being lost forever, because it pained him so much, the idea of anybody being lost from God.
Then define that. Let's go deep into that, because that's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to help people grow. And the most important point of growth is a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
We have listeners in over 90 countries, like I've said before, and many times. I'm so thankful. But the term lost, saved, people don't even understand what that is. So if you were to break down what you're saying, what was the message that your father was sharing?
Okay. Well, I grew up at a non-denominational Christian church, right? It's the Churches of Christ. They're non-instrumental. There is no head body. There's no governance. Every congregation is governed locally. And it's just Bible-based Christianity. They're not perfect. I don't think they have everything 100% right, but I don't think anybody does. But their basis is, what does the scripture say? Right? The Bible is the living word of God. And so that's the foundation of where we come from. Now, according to the Bible, right, God makes man gets separated by their sin from God. God sends Jesus to be the sacrifice, essentially, to bridge the gap created by sin between man and God. Okay. And you have to choose that. God willingly gives that away. God willingly wants to have that relationship. God wants to be in your life. God wants to connect with his creation. It's foundational belief for me because I believe that everybody is, I'm doing a live stream tonight actually talking about everybody has a purpose. Everybody was born with a specific purpose and a specific abilities and stuff like that. And so God makes everybody very individually, very purposefully. It's not an accident. But then sin separates us from God. The idea of doing things that are abominable in the sight of God or unholy in the sight of God, right? And sin ranges from, lying and sexual immorality to murder and theft, right? All the big ones we're familiar with the 10 Commandments and stuff like that are fairly universal. You see those in a number of belief systems. But saved is choosing to dedicate your life and the way you live to try and be like Christ, making the choice of, yes, I want God's love. Yes, I want God in my life, and I'm going to make the changes to try and live the way God would have me live as a person, right? That's a really simplified version of it all, but I think that's what we're going for at the moment. Separated from God is the idea of rejecting God's love and rejecting what God wants for your life, rejecting what God says is the right way to live your life, right? And really, what always baffles me is what the Bible truly outlines as the way to live your life is it's really just a moral and ethical life. I think Mark Twain said, that even if you were wrong about God, there is no downside to living a life devoted to God because it is a moral and ethical life, right? Very, very human, wholesome. And so the idea of being lost is rejecting that and not embracing that. And then if you believe in the Bible says that when we're then lost or hell or whatever you want to call it, which is there's a lot of pretty pictures, right? We all think about fire and damnation and all the movies and junk like that. Being lost is being separated from the love of God forever.
Yeah, I agree. And what you said, I mean, it says it's appointed unto man once to die, then the judgment. So when we use the term, if you're listening and you're not familiar with the terms and Brent and I are talking, when you're lost, it means, like he said, you don't know God. And then when you die, you're not with him. And instead of being in eternity with peace and joy and love and contentment with God, you're in the lake of fire forever, where the worm dieth not, where the fire is not quenched, or you'll be tormented day and night forever and ever. And that's Old Testament, New Testament, everything in between in the Bible. It talks about that. So to be saved, you're legitimately, literally being saved from that torment when we trust Christ. And again, Old Testament, New Testament, every generation that are recorded 7,000 years, 6,000 years, we've been in existence as a civilization. It's by faith. When we put our faith and trust in God and say, there's nothing I can do, I don't deserve to be with you, but please save me. Not those exact words, but you get what I'm saying. That's when we're saved. That's when we're with God for eternity. And that's where we're sealed with his promise and the Holy Spirit indwells us. So when we're talking about this, to us growing up and becoming Christians and trusting Christ ourselves, I don't ever want to take that too lightly or flippantly. So if this is all new to you, reach out to Brent, reach out to me, and we can discuss this more, because it doesn't matter if you're sick or healthy. It doesn't matter if you're fit or fat. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you're known or unknown. We're all statistically here, maybe 75 years. And after that's eternity. And a grain of sand of a grain of sand of a grain of sand doesn't compare to the massive foreverness, right? So that's why this is the most important thing. And what Brent said is his dad devoted his life to telling people about that. And we all do in our own way, but his dad did it full time, every day, sold out for Jesus. So is that correct?
That's correct. And I can tell you, let me give you guys just the point blank win for this one. Okay. My father passed back in last May. We celebrated it at his memorial service. We celebrated his life. My mother is not devastated. My family was not devastated by the loss of our father, because not a one of us had any reaction other than, well, we're sad that we don't get to see him anymore. But all of us went, he's reached his reward. This is a win for Dad. He's crossed the finish line of his whole life's work, of his whole life's devotion. He's crossed the finish line and he's sitting at the footsteps of God now. So like my father passing was not a devastating event for our family. My father been dying for several years, but it was kind of up and down, up and down. But it wasn't a hugely devastating moment for us. In
Because
fact,
you'll see him again. You'll see him forever in eternity as your brother.
And for him, it's this reward he's been working towards his whole life, right? This is the finish line. And, being my dad, he couldn't die until after church. It was hilarious. He was actually in a medically induced coma, and we had church services going in his room. And even in a medically induced coma, he was doing the hand thing. I don't know if you've ever seen someone lead singing. They do the hand thing to keep time.
Yep.
In a medically induced coma, he was doing that with the worship. And then after worship, he just drifted off. Like, it was so characteristic of my father. It was like, no, you can't die during church. You got to wait till after church.
That's awesome. And he sold out for God and what matters. So if you're listening to this and you're like, what are they talking about? Or you want to learn more, again, reach out to Brent or I, because he's going to finish his story. But the story that matters is yours and what Jesus did and how much God loves you. And, nobody has done anything bad enough, quote unquote, if you're not watching,
Mm-hmm.
that you can't be forgiven and loved and to be with God for eternity. There's nothing that can't be forgiven except rejecting him, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. So reach out.
Actually picks up.
Say what?
That's actually where the story picks up.
Do it, man. Continue from there.
In high school, right, I became a teenager, and I became typically interested in teenager things. And so, I made a lot of, from a faith perspective, a lot of wrong choices in high school. I, of course, I was already interested in girls at that point, but I was very interested in girls at that point and started making some choices with my girlfriends that were not holy, that were not in alignment with my beliefs. And so I actually started living two lives, because being a preacher's kid, what you do is not taken out on you. What you do is taken out on your father. It didn't I honestly, there are times in my life I feel like I could have killed somebody, and the church would have been like, well, Dave, why didn't you do better with your kid? It wouldn't be the fact that I made a bad choice. It would have been my dad's fault. And so I got very good at concealing my indiscretions from the rest of my life.
It's interesting you say that and you bring it up with that perspective, because so many times you hear the PKs, the preacher's kids, complain and bitch and moan about, oh, I grew up and I was in a bubble and it was in a fish tank, which is partially true. And I don't not feel bad. But there's so many jobs out there where the parents and the kids are connected, because we are connected.
Right.
But for you to bring up the proper perspective, it's not you're being judged by your father, but your father's being judged by you. That's a huge discernment and a lot of wisdom that whether you had it doesn't sound like you had it as a teen, but you have it now. That's a great perspective. What the kids do reflects on the father and the family name and ultimately on God. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Brent.
Well, I was actually very utterly aware of it as a teen. I worked very hard to conceal that life from our church, from my parents. I did everything I could to build walls. I carefully tailored my friendships. I was not close friends with any of the church kids. I was friends with them. I did things with them, but they were not my inner circle. I had one who actually eventually breached that, and she understood that I was going to make my choices and they were on me. But I kept them in this very facade. I was a good church kid, and I went to church, and I went to Sunday school, and I went to camps, and I played all the games exceedingly well because I'd had a lifetime of training on it. And I was shaking hands on Sunday morning and helping out and volunteering and leading this project or that project. But I kept my life really separate because I knew I was making my own choices. I had amazing parents who loved me, supported me, encouraged me, empowered me. But some of the things, that choices I was making, I knew they wouldn't approve of, and I knew it wouldn't look good on them. And so I felt like I had to fight, and my siblings and I have talked about this over the years. We were all very, very cognizant of trying to keep our choices from ever blowing back on our parents, because we knew we were doing things that they didn't approve of, that they didn't teach us to do, that they taught us not to do. We were making our choices. We didn't want that to burn them because we felt like that would be, they should not have to pay for our choices, right? I believe very much, just like the Bible tells us that God gave us free will, right? That's why sin exists, is we get to make our own choices. We don't have to follow God. And so, just like I wouldn't want my choices to blow back on my God, I didn't want my choices to blow back on my dad, because I knew I was doing things he wouldn't approve of. And so it was something I became very living a double life. And then we moved again. We moved my senior year.
Oh,
right
wow.
I started
That's
my
tough.
senior. And it happened to my brother too. My brother had to do his senior year in a whole new place, and so did I.
Wow.
And that sent me in a tailspin pretty bad. I was very seriously involved with a young woman at that point. I had a full-time job on a ranch. I actually almost stayed in Wyoming. I had a place I could stay, like my own house on the ranch. The only reason I moved with them was I didn't want to break my mom's heart and tear the family apart. But I had the opportunity and the option to stay because I had a place to live and I had an income. But it really shook my world foundationally, because I had worked really hard in high school. By my junior year, I only spent 3 hours of the day at school. I had front loaded all of my hard work, my early part of my high school career. So my junior year, I was TAing for the first hour and a half at a fourth grade classroom. I came up to the high school. I did an hour and a half of class, had lunch, did an hour and a half of class, and then I went to work study. I had no intention of going to school full time my senior year ever. And we moved, and the place where we moved was like, oh no, you only have 1 credit left to graduate here, but you have to go a half a day all year if you can find a job we like. And if you can't, you got to go a full day all year, even though you only need 1 credit to graduate. And so I started making some drastic choices back then. And I told my mom, I was like, look, I can homeschool myself and be done before Christmas. This is stupid. And my parents, like I said, always empowered me. They're like, well, public school is free, homeschooling is not. So if you want to do this, you got to pay for it. And so I paid for my schooling my senior year, worked a full-time job in construction. Well, the year started, and turns out Missouri didn't recognize homeschooling at the time. And so I had to go adjacently and work through a school in Arkansas. Well, the credits were different in Arkansas. So I picked up a few more classes I had to take. Halfway through that year, they sold out to a religious academy in Mississippi. And all of a sudden, I'm in my last half of my senior year, and I'm having to take 4 years worth of religious studies on top of my class curriculum in the last half of my senior year.
And did that, at that point in your life, were you like, I don't want anything to do with religion? Or were you just like, I'll just pound through them? What was your attitude towards that?
I was more frustrated than anything. I went the route because it's like I worked really hard to not have to do this and not have to go full time and not have to. My senior year was supposed to be easy, and I ended up doing years of work in the last half of my senior year. like literally a couple of years worth of work to make up for the fact that my school sold out part of the way through the year, make up for the fact that Arkansas and Mississippi both have different requirements. And I was already had gotten pretty good at living two lives, right? I lived my church life, I lived my regular life. But when I was in Missouri, the church we were at, if you go to a lot of small churches, you find out not many people are actually actively doing things. And so like our family was the show at the church. My dad preached, I led worship and taught children's church. My mom and my grandmother both taught the children's classes during Bible school. And so like I would lead worship on Sunday morning up until time for the sermon. And then I'd go teach children's Bible school during the sermon. Well, I was also the oldest teen at the church. So I started running the teen group as well. And within a year of being there, I'm unofficially the youth minister because all the other teens I have are junior high age teens. I'm teaching church or teaching children's church, preaching every now and then when my dad's out of town, and leading worship every Sunday, right? I'm full blown into ministry while working a full-time job and trying to complete school. And I'm still not entirely, I had my faith, but it was on the back burner for me. And I felt my life heading in a direction when all these people was like, oh yeah, chip off the block, gonna be just like your dad, huh? Gonna go into the ministry. Dude, I freaked out. Totally freaked out. I'm working construction full time. I'm through my senior year and now I'm trying to get on with my life. I'm trying different jobs. I had already passed on multiple chances to go to college because I knew I didn't want to go to college. There are times I feel guilty about the fact that I actually passed up probably more opportunities to go to school than a lot of people ever get. I passed up a shot at Juilliard for theater. I passed up a full ride scholarship for a local college in Wyoming for theater, but school just wasn't the right choice for me. And I knew it. I knew if there wasn't someone making me go to school, I wasn't going to go. But I'm in this rhythm of working and helping at the church and being the youth minister. And all of a sudden this became a reality of, oh, look, I'm going to be a minister like my dad. I don't want to be a minister. At that point in my life, I resented my dad for moving us around the country. I was so angry about my senior year that I hated my dad for moving us around the country to some extent. So hate's probably a strong word. I was always angry at my dad. I never hated him, but I was always angry at my dad. Meanwhile, I had already actually met the woman I was going to marry, because that year when we moved to Missouri, I was so angry that my mom didn't know what to do with me. And so my brother was like, hey, send him out to spend the summer with us. You know, we wanted to have him out. We're settled. Send him out to have the summer with us. I went through this as a senior myself, so I understand what he's going through. Send him out here. And so I had gone and spent that first summer with my brother for part of it and met the woman I would later marry at a church youth retreat while I was staying with my brother.
Nice. All things work together for good to those who love God.
Right? It's this crazy, and we had no idea that's where life was going. Like she barely would talk to me because I had long hair at the time. I had a goatee. I've had a goatee since I was 15 years old, but I had a goatee and I had hair down in the middle of my back. And like she was raised very conservatively and wanted nothing to do with me. We ended up only talking because we got stuck in the same car on a long ride. And my sister-in-law kicked off the conversation about the fact that I had been a ranch hand and she was into horses. And that was our first real conversation, but I had no idea, right? So I went back to my world in Missouri, and over the next couple of years, going out and visiting my brother, doing church stuff, she kept coming back into my life at these church events. And just before I turned 20, I was up in the Northwest and I was actually teaching a children's program at this massive church event. It was a big multi-day conference. And she was the teacher's assistant in the 4th and 5th grade classroom I was teaching during this event for 2 days. And we just hit it off conversationally, right? We ended up talking halfway through the night, the last night of the event. Her chaperones came to find her because she's 2 years younger than me. And they found her talking to me and they're like, "Oh, you're with Brent. It's okay." Right. No one worried about it. I was Dave's kid. It was cool. And when I drove away that next morning, she asked me years later, she's like, "What was that look?" Because I was looking out the back window of the car as we're driving away. And in that moment, I went, if I don't marry this girl, I'm an idiot. I knew right then and there. It's like, if I don't marry her, I am a complete idiot. This is who I need to spend my life with. I was still 18 or 19 at the time. But then life moved on and I decided that I was heading down this path and I didn't want to be a preacher. I didn't want to be a youth minister. I wasn't going to do it. I just hell no. Right. So I kept trying to put away money so I could go either back to Wyoming or maybe go out to the coast. And every time I put it away, start to get enough money put back so I could move, my car would break down. I'd lose everything or something like that. Right. So I had a panic attack one day and joined the military. I'd always wanted to join the military. I'd always thought about joining the military. And I had this panic attack because I just had to dump my bank account again because I was trying to leave. I was not going to become a minister. And so I went and joined the military. Jonah had a fish. I had the U.S. Air Force. That is the next huge segue in my life because I was in the military for a year and it was the worst year of my life.
Talk about that. What did you learn? I'm laughing on this side of the camera because I know so many people personally who are like, I don't want to go this path, or I don't want to listen to my parents, or nobody knows what they're talking about. I don't want to be told what to do. And then they join the military. And I'm like, are you not paying attention to reality here? So keep going with your story, Brent.
I had always loved the military. Okay. I grew up with a deep love for the military. I still have a deep love for the military. Both my brothers served in the military. My father served in the military. My grandfathers served in the military. We're a military family. And so for me, like, it wasn't even like a hard option. I was already thinking about it anyway. This just compounded it. The only reason I hadn't gone in the military yet was it's like, oh, well, I'm doing okay this way. Maybe I don't need to go that way. And I joined the Air Force only because I went into a multi-office recruiter and they were the only ones that were open. So many people asked me over the years, like, why the Air Force? They all expected me to go try to go to the Navy and go to the Navy SEALs or something, or maybe go in the Army. So many people, why they were open. Honest answer. There were 3 offices in there. They were all closed except for the Air Force. That's how it happened right there. And I went in with the pure intention of going into special forces. In fact, I've told kids for years, even before that point, I told kids never go in without a locked in contract. Never, ever join the military without a contract in writing about what school you're getting and what you're doing. And I wouldn't even take one. Because in the Air Force, you have to try out for special forces. There's no guarantees, right? No guarantee that you even got a shot. You get to try out for it at basic. And I was so confident because I'm an all or nothing kind of person that it's like, you know what? Nope. This is what's going to happen. And he's like, well, let's get you a school and you can still try out for it. I was like, no, it's all or nothing, man. I'm all in. That's just the way I go. So I went in with no contract, which meant in the military Air Force, what means I would have been the SPs, which is the Air Force version of the MP, right? Military police. It's the SP in the Air Force. So I would have been SP, but ID default. That's what you went to if you didn't have a MOS already picked out. And keep in mind, I'm going to the Air Force because I'm running away from God at this point. The direction of my life was so crystal clear. Like, God might as well have hit me with a giant glowing neon sign. It was utterly clear where I was going. And I ran away to the military because it was my last, no, God, absolutely not. This is what I'm going to do. It's my life. Bad choice. Running from God doesn't work. The Bible gave us the example of Jonah. Well, God made it a little more clear. In basic training, I actually got recycled or rolled back my first week of basic training because I challenged a TI. They put me in charge of a squadron of guys. And I told him at the time, I was like, please don't. He's like, you're the oldest guy here, dude. You're the old man. You're 20 years old. I was like, please don't make me a leader. Just let me do basic, man, and leave me alone. He's like, nope, you're going to be a squad leader. I was like, you're going to regret that. Sure enough, a week into it, one of the guys I was in basic training with, who was in my squadron, had screwed up. And okay, that happens. He was being stupid. He was getting yelled at. No big deal. But our TI went a little too far, in my opinion. He started talking trash about the guy's wife and kid and stuff like that. So that blows up and they throw him. It's like, go to the hall. You're out of my unit. Get out. TI comes back into the day room and is like, has anybody else got a problem? It's like, man, you had to say something. Because I've always taken leadership very seriously. And so it was like, no, I can't in good conscience sit here and ignore that. So I stood up and it's like, sir, Airman Dowlen, that wasn't right, sir. You went too far. This big TI gets in my face, right? And I've always been, I told you, hyper aggressive. And so I got this guy and he's closing distance. And it's like, oh man, here we go. Gets in my face, starts screaming at me. Oh, is that what you think? Blah, blah, right? Starts freaking out at me. I stepped into him, like chest to chest, stepped into him, closed distance, looked him square in the eye. I said, take a swing, mother effer. Give me a reason to put you in the hospital tonight. Like it, he immediately realized the situation. And I didn't appreciate this at the time, but he showed some professionalism, immediately realized the situation had escalated farther than it should. Took a step back from me. He was like, Trainee Dowlen, go join your friend. You're done with me. Right? De-escalated it. Because we were going right there, man. I would have put him down so hard. My adopted brother and I used to spar every day after school. That was our stress release for years. Like full contact mixed martial arts before there was really mixed martial arts, including weapons combat, like baseball bats, legitimate swords. I have scars from our sparring matches. So I was already scrappy. And I was ready to put that man down.
So once you disrespect a superior in the military, you can get discharged for that. What happened at that point?
So they would have been perfectly in right because I did threaten the man. And so he actually recycled me. He sent me back a week in training. That's what happened. Before they throw you out, the Air Force is a more gentle soul. So before they throw you out, they move me back and basically started basic training all over again for me. And they put me in a basic training unit with a brand new drill sergeant. In the Air Force, they're training instructors instead of drill sergeants, but they put me in a unit with a brand new TI. We were his first unit. And he was not happy about me getting stuck in his unit. And so he met me when they walked me into the office with him. And he looked at me and said, according to this file, which I have not read yet, you are a dirtbag. Are you a dirtbag? And I said, I don't know, Sergeant, are you a leader? And he just grinned, dude, like got just this great little grin on his face. Like, okay, he's got some spunk. He said, I'll tell you what, we'll both find out. He pulled out his bottom drawer and just dropped the file. He said, I won't read that. You show me what you are, and I'll show you what I am. Ended up being my saving grace. He's one of the few men in my military experience that I have the utmost respect for. At the time, he was tech sergeant. He went on to master sergeant after I was into school, talking to guys coming into school. Master Sergeant Henry Parker. And this is 22 years later, I can tell you the man's name. He made that kind of impression on me. Just utmost respect for him, very honorable man. And the day I graduated, really graduated basic training, because you have the unofficial graduation the week before the official graduation. He handed me my airman's medallion. And he said, I read the file, Airman Dowlen. You were right. And I was kind of taken back a little bit, and he grinned and he said, look at that. My biggest dirtbag turned out to be my best airman. And I mean, that moment years later has this huge, like, I still smile. You can see me if you're on the video, watch, just grinning ear to ear, because it was such a moment in my life.
And of course, that's an excellent example of leadership.
I hope so. That, you know, it was, I warned them when they started. It's like, if you make me a leader, expect this is what's going to happen. And so it was nice to feel very vindicated, because I still had the other sergeant messing with me every now and then. In fact, I got into graduation week, in which you change from BDUs to dress blues. And he saw me going through the chow line and called me to the snake pit, which is the table at the end of the chow line where all the sergeants sit during chow. And he called me over to the snake pit and was like, Trainee Dowlen, look at you in your blues, graduation week. I said, begging your pardon, Sergeant, that'd be a Airman Dowlen. It's like, oh, Airman Dowlen now. You're graduating. Like, the dude was trying to make a show of it. And my sergeant walked over and said, Airman Dowlen, you may proceed with your chow. You're dismissed. And I started walking away. Thank you, Sergeant. And the other guy started to be like, but I was, and my sergeant, I glanced back over my shoulder. My sergeant just drug his fingers down his stripes and pointed at the other sergeant as a count my stripes, count yours. You know, and he looked at him and said, you dismissed him. You kicked him out. He's mine. Stay away from him. It's like, yeah, great moment.
Yeah.
By the hair of my teeth, gotten into special forces training at that point.
So then where does it go from here to make sure I don't want to miss anything in your story, but I want to make sure we get everything in this episode that's going to help the listeners grow. So from that point in your story, where did your military career go?
Well, let me speed this up, because I know I can get long-winded on this. So I went to special forces training. I did not qualify for special forces training. In fact, I asked the recruiting sergeant, I was like, why me? Because I didn't physically complete the requirements. And when we were running, we had to run 2 miles for a certain amount of time. On the last half mile of that run, I mean, guys were dropping left and right. We were puking off the side of the track. Like, I had just thrown up off the side of the track while I was running. And we were in the last half mile, like the last quarter mile. You could see the last leg of the track, right? And this dude who had made it the whole way started to quit. And I grabbed his shoulder, even though I was struggling. I grabbed his shirt and started dragging him. Like, we are almost there. You're not stopping now. And I drug him the last quarter mile. And the sergeant said, I can't teach that. I can make you stronger. I can make you faster. I can't teach that. That's why you're going. When I got there, long story short, I ended up splitting my leg from my knee to my ankle, the front bone of my lower leg, my left leg. I started with what was, I guess, shin splints, that then went to a stress fracture, that went to a full-on fracture, and split the front bone in my lower leg from my knee all the way to my ankle.
Ouch. That's
yeah.
no fun.
By the time it was diagnosed, I had been running 6 miles a day, 5 days a week for 2 weeks on a broken leg. I was in excruciating amounts of pain, but I was not going to quit or fall back. And I was only a couple of weeks into training. I became a human experiment for the next 5.5 months. I mean, my world just got rocked. I was on crutches. All I could do was CQ duty. I became a human experiment. It was doctor's appointment after doctor's appointment, because in the military, if they can't clearly figure out why something happened to you, they don't care. They want to know, because they want to make sure it doesn't happen again, right? They're more concerned with the why than the injury. It wasn't healing. And so I eventually got medically moved, and my doctor tried to medically discharge me. And the orthopedist that had taken over my case was the commander of the hospital, and he wasn't about to have a medical discharge on his record. And so they doped me up on codeine and pushed me through physical therapy, because if you can get through physical therapy, you're better. So I was taking insane amounts of codeine. Like, they actually had scratched out the number on the bottle, and it said, take it when it hurts. I was taking 32,000 milligrams of Motrin every day, Tylenol with codeine, and high dose naproxen for anti-inflammatories every day, and drinking to deal with the pain.
And I'm sure your stomach felt fantastic after all that too, right?
Oh God, it's amazing. I have a liver. In that time, I tried to kill myself. I ended up slitting my wrist on duty. I don't think I was trying to kill myself. I think it was a subconscious thing, because I didn't realize I had done it. I was playing with a knife, and one of the guys took it away from me. I was like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, what are you doing? I looked down, my wrists are bleeding. So I hadn't cut them very deep, right? Like I said, I don't think I was consciously trying to kill myself, but it was enough to cause a bit of a fiasco. So then I'm in counseling and going to doctors. I threatened to kill 2 psychiatrists because they threatened to lock me up for my own protection, which then escalated the situation. Eventually, they cleared me medically, but not to go back to special forces, but onto another school. And my life went downhill from there. The commander of that school hated me from the day I walked in. He promised me when I got there that I would never graduate his school, took away all my privileges, took away all my freedoms. And I got screamed at every morning. What did you do last night? We're going to find out. You might as well tell us. At that point, I had developed a drug problem. I was drinking a 5th of tequila every night because I was self-medicating to get over the drug problem, and trying not to kill my commanding officer, because I was just angry, bitter, and violent at that point. And they busted me out of school. Like, I self-identified in the military, and if you do that, you're supposed to be okay. So I came forward and asked for help, said I had a problem with the codeine, and they wiped out my medical file when I transferred, because I was on a special forces base. So the record of my injury didn't exist. They were like, why do you have this codeine? Why do you have a prescription for this codeine? You're not hurt. You never were. It's like, the last 5 months of my life disagrees with that. So I was spiraling pretty bad. They pulled me out of class. They penalized me. They started separating me out from everybody else. Like, I was on a downward spiral. And then they told me I had to go to lockdown rehab, not for the codeine, because they got an E1 to rat me out for having a beer. I was 20 years old. I was like 2.5 months from 21. And they busted me out of school to go to alcohol rehab for a beer, because the guy was trying to get rid of me. and I just spiraled bad. My dad had tried to help and I wouldn't let him. And finally I told him, it's like, okay, you can try and help. Well, I refused to go to rehab, which is the same as failing rehab. So they were booting me out of the military at this point. And they called me into their office one day, like my discharge was almost done. And they told me that the building in Texas where the discharge paperwork was being processed burned to the ground. I went through the roof, man. I blew up. And I went into the woods next to the base with a bottle of tequila. And my options were, I managed to kill myself that night, just drink myself to death. And for me, there was no other option at that point. And I hit a wall, and instead of hitting the bottle, I dropped the bottle and I hit my knees. And I said, okay, God, you win. I'll quit running. I'll stop. You win. Just, I did this to myself, but get me out of here. Just like Jonah, 3 days later, I was on the way home on a bus. My discharge paperwork that had taken them 2 months burned to a cinder, just gone. But within 3 days of hitting my knees and giving in and saying, okay, God, I get it. I'll stop running at this point. I was on my way home. And my life changed radically. I had realized if I had become half the man my dad was, I was a good man. I had done a good life.
So where does your life go from there? You're running from God, you hit rock bottom, and now you get another chance. Talk about that, Brent.
So my fiance at this point was still with me. So my wife and I, our relationship was forged on opposite sides of the country. We've never lived in the same place at this point. We went from really good friends, and this is the girl that I was like, I need to marry this woman. For 3 years, we'd been friends. We'd called back and forth. We had seen each other a couple times. And all through my choice to go to the military, we had kind of escalated to a more romantic relationship, but it was more of a courting relationship because she was in Washington and I was in Missouri. Well, then I was in Florida and Texas and Virginia and all over the place, right? I had told her on the phone. I was like, look, this is where my life is right now. If you want to walk away, walk away. You owe me nothing. I brought her to Florida when I was in special forces training to propose to her. And so she went through this whole drug addiction and alcohol and getting kicked out of the military with me. From opposite sides of the country, there was no commitment other than she had said yes. But she stayed. And she stayed. So when I got out, life just made sense to, in fact, they had me going to a psychiatrist the last couple of weeks I was in because they were really worried about me either killing somebody or killing myself. And after our first session, he was like, wow, you've had a rough run of it. So my job is just to get you out of here in one piece, keep you from going to prison at this point because you do something stupid between here and now. And he figured out that Sarah was the key to everything. We talked about Sarah every day. That's all we talked about because it was the one place in my mind where there was peace. So when I get out, I ended up moving to my brother's house in Illinois because he wanted to help me get back on my feet. And Sarah came out for Thanksgiving that year because I got out right at the I was on a bus home October 31st, 2020. Leaving the military. And so I brought her out to have Thanksgiving with me and look at the area so we could decide, where we wanted to live after we got married. And she decided she hated where we were. So then I went out to Washington a couple times to see if I could find a job out here. And yeah, eventually I found a job in Washington. She paid for me to make the trip out and just move out and look for a job once I got here. She borrowed money from her grandparents to pay for me to make the trip from Illinois to Washington. And We ended up getting married in April of 2021. And that was almost 21 years ago. Or, yeah. We're getting ready. We're approaching our 21st anniversary. And life has been wild, man. That was the tame part of my life that you got through. I saw how you do these is like, man, my story is super complicated and long.
No, man, that's what we're here for. It's a long format podcast. Is we're here to, like I said, help each other grow and learn from each other and glorify God ultimately. So you get married now, and you and Sarah married in 2000. Obviously, like you said, 22-year anniversary this year coming up. What between when you were married and today do you want to talk about that you think is important to represent you and to help our listeners grow?
So this is where we jump from. We got married in 2001, and it didn't take long to figure out we weren't making enough money to live where we were working. So we moved to Missouri. I got a job. My sister got me a job where she was. And while we were there, lo and behold, we get involved with this church that I have connections with, because when I was doing youth ministry with the small church my dad was at in the same area, I interacted with this youth minister all the time. And so when Sarah and I started going there, we started volunteering with the youth group there. And after a couple of years there, after about a year there, I actually started a drama program for the teens, because we had all these super creative teens with no real outlet to use their gifts in the church and for God. And so I created a drama ministry there. During that course, I had an accident when I was setting up for a show and fell 21 feet from the church ceiling where I had a zip line set up and landed on church pews and broke my back. I did not know I broke my back until 3 years later when I was a youth minister in the Northwest. I woke up one morning. I'd been I had gone from that church. I recovered from that injury, or thought so, and had realized that, I was doing youth ministry full time. I just wasn't getting paid for it. And that's what I wanted to be. That's where God had been moving me to. And so I took a job as a youth minister up here in the Pacific Northwest, and had been a youth minister there for a couple of years. And that had come to an end. And I woke up one morning, I couldn't walk. I couldn't feel my legs. And it was the most terrifying moment of my life. It turns out I had fractured my L3 vertebrae on that fall, and it wasn't staying in place anymore. And it was cutting off my spinal cord. So that, then moved into a time where I was homeless because the church job had ended. They couldn't afford to keep a youth minister anymore. And we ended up having to move in with my parents. And now I'm fighting a back injury and trying to figure out, where I'm going to go is looking for a job as a youth minister. And eventually that ends us out where we are here.
And before you go on, with the previous addiction to codeine and the drugs they gave you, did this open up any cans of worms with drug addiction, or were you pretty solid there?
I was actually pretty solid there. They kind of cold turkey forced me. When I came forward and self-identified for help, instead of sending me to a rehab or taking me to the hospital where they could monitor me or anything, it was the weekend. They didn't really care. Basically, they took all my drugs away and told me I could stay on the phone as long as I wanted, but I couldn't leave the building. And so they literally just crashed me cold turkey off the drugs. And I spent that entire weekend on the phone with Sarah, getting the shakes, getting the sweats. I don't know if you've dealt with addictions like that, but it's unpleasant, to say the least, to go off at cold turkey. Generally, if you're going to do that to somebody, they do it under medical supervision. It was not a pleasant experience. But the medication, once I got enough days through it, and they didn't realize I was, self-medicating with alcohol at the time to get past the crashing off the drugs, which is not a good solution for all of our listeners. That's not a good solution, guys. Please don't do that. You just compound the problem so much worse. But I was forced through that. So by the time I got through that, to this day, I stay away from pain meds. I have a ridiculous high tolerance. They don't work very well because I've been addicted to them, and that was not the first time I dealt with that. So I don't stay on drugs very long. Because lower dose painkillers don't work for me, because I do have a resistance to them. If I get seriously injured at this point, they have to give me things like morphine because nothing else even touches it. And so, like, when I fell at the church there in Missouri, I was on codeine for 2 days out of the hospital. They had me on morphine in the hospital and discharged me, and I went home and it was oh man, I was beat up. I stayed on codeine for 2 days after I got home, and I made my wife flush the bottle. Nothing but Tylenol. I had her make sure there was no alcohol in the house. And I got through the rest of that injury taking Tylenol and drinking Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper. It's the right. It's a right solution, right?
So I've had several injuries since then, and like they're just flabbergasted when I'm like, nope, don't eat it. Nope, don't want it. I don't touch it. I broke my neck since then, and they're like, oh, here's some painkillers. And nope, I don't want them.
Yeah, it's not worth opening the can. Pain's temporary.
Yeah.
To get re-addicted is not worth it. So you brought us up to almost today, a year ago. So from a year ago, when all this happened, you moved in with your parents. Where does Brent's life go from there?
So my dad closed the church he was at, the small church he was at. They decided to close the doors, liquidate the building, because there were several other churches in the area, and that church was just not, they had grown old. No one was coming there. The neighborhood had changed. And so they liquidated the building and gave the funds to another church to replant a church in the area in a better location at another time. And so we're living at their house, and all of a sudden they're moving. So we're moving. And we ended up in Eastern Washington, where I am now. And I needed work and wasn't finding anything as a youth minister. And so I took a construction job, and my wife took a job as security at the construction site where I was working. And we've been here for 15 years now. And it took me a lot of years of being here to realize that I was in a rebuilding period. The church I had left, there was a lot of politics. It wasn't just the money. Things went very, very badly. I felt very betrayed and hurt by people I had trusted and loved. And it almost destroyed my marriage. And I tailspin bad when everything went south, right? I followed God's plan. I had followed God's idea, and that came to a crashing, burning halt. And I felt slighted. You know, I had followed what I thought was the plan. I had done what I was supposed to do. And I honestly felt slighted by God. Like, it really injured my faith. I never lost my faith, but as I always say, you know, God and I took a time out. Well, God didn't take a time out. I took a time out from God. That's accurate. God didn't take a time out from me. But I felt very slighted. And it took a lot of years out of being here working construction and getting involved with the church out here. I do some AV for the church, but I turned down an opportunity to help with the youth team here because I just wasn't ready. And I've got my daughters now, and I want to focus on them. And so, but it took several years of being at a healthy church and just being nurtured there for me to realize that I was really angry and bitter at God for what had happened at the church I had been at. Because I changed the entire direction of my life because I went where God showed me to go. Well, God never promised you safe harbors. God promised that you will not take more than you can take, but he won't take you into anything more than you can handle. You may not think you can handle it, but God knows you better than that. And it took several years of being here in a safe harbor and being away from it to realize, like, I've got a lot of bitterness and resentment about how this all went down. I was betrayed by some very, very close people who've been in my life for a long time, to the point where, I mean, it ended badly. It ended very bitterly. I almost destroyed my marriage in the process, like I said. So it was just, it's taken a lot of years to heal from that. And then we hit this point where I'm here and I've gone from construction and I'm working IT. And about 2 years ago, God came knocking again. And I mean, I spent weeks praying and pleading with God, because like, no, I'm not ready for this again. I know things are better, but I'm not ready for this again. And it was so clear, so utterly clear for me what was next. And I run from God. I learned I am a little thick. Sometimes God's got to hit me with a brick or three. But I knew better than to try and run. Now I've got daughters, and it's like, nope, I'm not putting them in that path. And the fallible man was born.
Before you get to the fallible man, where we are today, I want you to go back and talk about, how did you reconcile your relationship with God? So the bitterness is there, the anger is there, the betrayal has happened, and some people know exactly what we're talking about. Some people have not had this happen to them. Most people have. So we have, quote unquote, bad things happen to us, and somehow in our perverse, selfish man view, we blame God when God only has good for us. Now, he sometimes allows bad things, quote unquote, bad things to happen, because ultimately they will be good for us in the future and in eternity. But how did you learn to reconcile man bad, God good, my journey straight ahead? How did that happen, Brent?
I've always been more of an intellectual than emotional person. I've never been very emotionally driven. According to the psychiatrist in the military, I'm actually a full-blown sociopath. Like, I can completely turn off my feelings. I don't feel it. I don't have emotional responses to things. Subsequently, I also don't have very emotional connections to most things, including people. The military called it morally flexible. And depending on which side of it you're on, that's a good thing or a bad thing. A healthy psychiatrist would say it's a bad thing. Military special forces went, oh, good. Yes, you can follow orders and kill people and not lose sleep over it. That's good. So depending on which side of that you land on, I'm either, qualified for special forces that way, but I may have failed mentally the other way. But because of that, and a lot of that has to do with me shutting myself off over the years from moving so much. I got hurt so much moving around. I just learned to turn it all off in my younger years and not attach myself to places or people. And so on a intellectual level, right? I used to be a youth minister. I'm very schooled. I am an ordained minister. I've spent a lot of my life studying the Bible and teaching the Bible. And so intellectually, I always knew that A, God didn't do this to me. B, it wasn't really his fault, but I did not want to deal with the blame. It was just easier to blame God at that point for me, because I know the Bible well enough to know God doesn't promise easy. In fact, if you read the Bible, it's very clear that it's not an easy path to follow God. and there will be difficulties and there will be pain. And so I had to get out of my own selfish space with that and start looking objectively and intellectually at things, because dealing with an emotional pain because of my mindset was very difficult for me. Actually having something emotionally wound me was almost a very new experience for me, because I managed to shut off my emotional reactions to things for so many years and step into just that intellectual plane that I had no idea how to handle an emotional slight at this level. And so that's been, making that transition has been a lot of love and support from my wife in a big way. Sarah is the center of my world. I struggle with that in my relationship with God, of God first and my wife second, because the demonstration of God's love for me has always been my wife. Sarah has always been my safe harbor since the day she said I do. And that's where I see God the most, is looking at my wife in the way she sees me. She accepts me warts and all, so to say. So it's taken a lot of years of that. Honestly, my children were the biggest difference, because once my first daughter was born, it is the first time in my life that I can actually remember having an emotional connection to something. And because of that, it made me re-examine how I felt about what had happened and what was ailing me about what had happened, because I was now confronted with the fact that I had an emotional connection to things. Even if I had learned to control it, even if I had learned to shut it off, there was still a very deep emotional possibility that I hadn't dealt with at this point. And so once I had this epiphany of, wait, I do have emotions. That means that I have to allow for the possibility that this hurt me at an emotional level. And that's why I still have all this anger and resentment. It's not something intellectual. It's not something I can think my way through, which is very uncomfortable for me. It was something that I had to start accepting that there were some emotional implications. And once I did that, I could start healing. You know, it started with some humility and having to stop intellectually and look at it and go, okay, if I can have an emotional response to this, what really hurts me about this? What am I actually feeling and why? And then took some humility to go and take the first step and go, God, I know you didn't do this to me. I know this isn't your fault. And I know that you've never turned on me, but I had to get to that point of accepting there were some variables I wasn't dealing with because I didn't know how to deal with them. Once I did that, healing could actually start. I could start saying, hey, I know this wasn't God doing this to me. And once I took that blame off God and started actually realizing that it was an emotional hurt for me that had driven this wedge between me and God, I could start to deal with that. And the love I have for my daughter and for my wife started driving home the need to heal emotionally. That love started overriding other things. But even as that was starting to grow, there were some, moments with God is like, okay, God, this isn't your fault. That doesn't mean we're friends now. It took some time. I had to work back into really kind of reanalyzing my whole outlook on a relationship with God and what that meant and what that used to mean to me. And, I had gone from, I was working with teenagers, telling them about the love of God. But in all this, I had never forgiven myself for this. I felt like when I lost that, all the pain came back from the failure in the military into compounded to, I felt like I had followed this plan and now I failed as a youth minister, and everything felt like I just failed everything. And I couldn't forgive myself. I couldn't forgive God. And so it came with, I don't have room in my life to love my wife and my daughter the way I feel like I need to, the way I feel like I should, if I'm harboring all this anger and hate. And so I started to have to move. I started to have to change. And I realized at that point how very stagnant I had become in my life. I just sat there and festered in pain and in anger. And it wasn't healthy. And it wasn't doing anything good for me. And it was keeping me from things that did mean everything good to me. Because I looked at my child and I looked at the way my wife looked at me. And I thought, if that doesn't tell me that God has a bigger plan, then nothing will.
So with that, we've had a great time together today. So much to cover, so exciting, lots of stuff we even skipped so people can reach out to you, maybe one day read your book. But for right now, where's Brent today? Now that God's brought you to this place, where are you today and where are you heading so we can hopefully help you get to the next level?
Today, I'm in a much better place. Like I said, this turned around with, after years of being in that waiting place and healing, and I had no idea that's what was happening at the time. And I'll tell your listeners, guys, that is one of the hardest places to be, is in the waiting time between the waves of life. That hurry up and wait that the military loves to use, that in between, right? Our world tends to work in peaks and valleys, and we don't do well in that waiting time. But you need that waiting time sometimes to rebuild or to heal. And so I had no idea that was what was happening. And then the Fallible Man came at me like there was no choice for me. I knew it. I knew what I needed to do and where I was going, and that it was what I needed to do. And so I'm at a place now where I'm back to, I don't associate the Fallible Man with any religious organization, even though we teach a lot of very biblical principles and morals and ethics, because men are turned off by that a lot of times. There are a lot of men who are turned off by the thought of God because they haven't breached that yet in their life. And so I keep it generally separate from that because I want to be able to reach out to all men. But foundationally, if I look at everything behind it, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I don't entirely know where this is going, to be honest. I know I'm on the path I'm supposed to be, and I've connected with God in that. I know clearly this is his path for me. I can't tell you what the end of the journey looks like because it's not my journey alone. I'm just doing my best to recognize where God is taking me with this now and stay with that, because now it matters even more to me that my daughters see that my life reflects that, and that my wife and my children are seeing that that's where I'm going, because that's what I want for them. I know that's what's right for them. And so going forward, I'm in a good place with God, because I'm at a place where I can go, hey, God, this is your direction. I don't know where it's going. And it'd be really nice if you'd throw a few hints my way, but I'm okay with not knowing the end, because I'm confident that I'm on the journey God put me on at this point. And that feels like I'm in the right place again. So where God goes with this next, I got no idea. I don't duck away from the fact that I'm a believer and a Christian, or that the backbone of this is all built around my faith. I don't push religion in what I'm doing with the Fallible Man, but I don't shy away from it either. Like I said, I want to be able to reach as many men as possible. But the honest truth is, this is a path that God is taking me on. I believe that with all my heart. And I believe that's why I'm at total peace with having no clue how this is going, how I'm going to pay for things, how I'm going to accomplish things, because I'm trusting that God has got this plan and I'm just get to be a part of it at this point.
Amen, man. Amen. Just enjoy the journey and do your best. And like you said earlier, the people who are right with God, a lot of times it's a struggle most of the time, but it has the beautiful eternal blessings that go along with it. Then you have the people who aren't right with God that run away like Jonah, and you said but God brings you back in love. So neither path of life is sometimes easy. Only people I've seen who have easy lives are the people who have nothing to do with God or doing nothing good with their life, and Satan's using them to waste their life. Satan has two objectives, right? One, to keep you from trusting God, and the other from helping others to trust God. So he either wants to keep you from trusting God or make you so useless and such a hypocrite that you don't tell people about God because nobody would listen to you anyways. So he's a scumbag, he's a liar, and his whole job is just to hurt people. But it's so awesome to hear your story, Brent, and to see your journey isn't over, but we're at this midlife part, right? And there's so much more to it. So if someone listening in our community wants to get a hold of you, Brent, what's the best way for them to reach you?
If you go to my website, www.thefallibleman.com, there's links to pretty much everything I do there. There's my scheduling calendar is there for phone calls. I talk to people. I'm almost done with my personal training certifications, actually. So I'll be starting to do physical coaching, but I also do just conversations with people. I have content there. I'm all over YouTube. I have 9 social medias. Guys, I'm at the Fallible Man at pretty much every major social media platform. But if you go to my website, you can get to most of it there. You can hit me at info@thefallibleman.com. I check all my emails. There's a phone number on the website. It's the center hub for everything, or at least I'm trying to keep it the center hub. I got to clean it up some. I'm feeling pretty bummed and need some work. That when you're doing all of it, it's hard to keep up with some of it sometimes.
Yeah, just keep taking, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Exactly.
So I'll put those links in the show notes. So if you're trying to get a hold of Brent, we'll help you get there as quickly and efficiently as possible. But Brent, it's been a true pleasure, my friend. And from your birth to today, is there anything else we missed or a parting thought that you want to leave with our audience before we close shop for today?
You're never past finding a solution. Whether it's your relationship with God or whether it's something more trivial like physical. Like I said, I broke my back. I also broke my neck 2 years ago. And I'm still up and kicking. There's never too late. There's never too far that you can't come back to where you want to be. So many people think they can outrun the grace of God, or they can just, fall too far. They can get too heavy. They can get too out of shape. They can get too old. They can make too many wrong decisions. You are never too far to come back to the person you want to be, the life you want to be in your relationship with God.
Amen. Well, with that, Brent, thank you for being here today. You truly are a remarkable man. I appreciate your friendship, and I look forward to continuing in the future and hopefully meeting in person someday soon.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And to all our listeners, again, check out the show notes if you want to reach out to Brent or I. If you want to rate or review the podcast, we'd love it and appreciate it. Check out the Fallible Man podcast. If you have any questions, again, reach out to us. But please share this episode, not just so we get more popular or in more countries, but so people can be helped. And like our slogan says, like all knowledge, all truth comes from God, right? But we can't just listen to it. We got to do it. We got to repeat it so we can have a great life in this world and eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone. This was Mr. David Brent Dowlen. Check out this episode, share it with your friends. And if you need anything, please reach out to us. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.